The positions and opinions expressed by the speakers are strictly their own and do not necessarily represent the views of their employers, nor those of the DC Bar, its Board of Governors, or co-sponsoring communities and organizations. I'll now turn the program over to Ann Wilcox.
Amy, as always, we'd like to thank the bar staff for all of their help in putting this together. Those of you on video will know that we have a full room of attendees today. We're really glad people came out on this hot day for a program. We also have 3 of our bar presidents here, our most recent bar president, our current bar president, Charles Lowry, Ellen Jakovich, and our president-elect, Sean Snyder. So thank you for coming. And other members of the community staff who we really appreciate their help. I wanted to mention that this program will be videoed and it will be placed on YouTube within the next week or so. So everyone can go back and watch again, and that'll also be provide more visibility for our program. I wanted to mention next fall, we'll have more programs coming up. We're going to have a candidate debate among the at-large candidates, which is often what we do, the at-large city council candidates. We also have a new program we're going to start, which is an orientation for law students about statehood and voting rights and other issues that our community works on. And our law fellow who worked with us this spring from Catholic Law School, Kaylee Fields, is going to put together an orientation for first-year law students and educate them about some of these issues. So we think that's a great initiative. And we'll have other programs as well, along with our holiday reception that we always have. I'll introduce now Jim Bubar, our moderator for many years of this program. And thank again our panel for coming, which includes 2 brand new journalists. So I'm sure Jim will have some tricks up his sleeve for them, but thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
That's
okay,
better.
So this is our 16th annual Meet the Press. So we've been at this a while. Tom Sherwood is, he's great. He's kind of been here for a lot of those 16 years.
I think 16.
Michael has been here a couple times. We have Denise Rolark-Barnes, who's been here a couple of times. And we have 2 newbies. We have a podcaster for the first time because we are very forward-looking here at the bar, and we want to bring in the newer media. And we have Mitch Ryals, who was at one time Loose Lips, and now he's with the City Paper. Tom Sherwood, as you know, is a longtime Washington reporter and political analyst, a former NBC4 and Washington Post reporter. He continues to be the resident political analyst on WAMU's The Politics Hour and a contributor to the Washington City Paper. Denise Rolark-Barnes is a second-generation publisher of the Washington Informer that was founded in 1964. She's a graduate of Howard University Law School. And Michael Brice-Saddler joins us from the Washington Post, where he covers DC government and politics, and he's worked for the Post since 2003. Our newbie, Julia Karron. 18 years?
2018 when I started.
Yeah, he gave you a few more years credit. Sorry about that. Julia Karron is a senior podcast producer and interim director or something like that.
Executive producer.
Interim executive producer.
Interim executive producer.
Okay. At CityCast DC, and she covers local politics on a daily basis. And then Mitch Ryals is managing editor of the Washington City Paper and a former Loose Lips reporter. So welcome, everyone. If you're familiar, most of you are familiar with the format. I'll be asking a bunch of questions and let the journalists respond to these questions. And then we'll open it up to the audience and you all can ask some questions. And then we'll come back to me at the end and I'll ask some more questions. So as you know, and we're going to jump right in. So no like introductory statements, because Tom likes to just get in, answer questions, and leave. So we know that the Democratic primary closed 2 days ago on June 4th, and council members were up for re-election in wards 2, 4, 7, and 8, and at large. The question is, were there any major surprises that any of you noticed in this election? And what were the major issues among the candidates that you saw? Let's start with Mitch and work our way down to Denise.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Is that all right? All right. I don't know. There weren't really any surprises. All the incumbents were in races where there was an incumbent won handily, as they were expected to. Oh, question. Into the mic. It got it. Okay. Let's go down a little bit. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Got it. All the incumbents won, which was expected. I don't know if the outcome in the Ward 7 race, where Wendell Felder appears to have run away with it, was unexpected. I'm looking maybe for affirmation or counterpoint from my co-panelist here, but he was certainly among the 3 or 4 front runners. I think maybe in my mind, if you can call it an upset, would be in the shadow senator race between Eugene Kinlow and I'm forgetting the other gentleman's name, Aka Jane. Kinlow has a fairly extensive history and in DC politics, working for Muriel Bowser for many years, and generally on statehood initiatives. And Mr. Jane is a relative newcomer, so he beat the guy with name recognition, or appears to have beaten. I think that race has been called.
Yeah. Can everyone hear? Is it better if I hold it here? Fabulous. I mean, the thing, at least at CityCast, that we're focused on right now is the Ward 7 race. And for me, at least for us, the big issue is the RFK Stadium site, because that is where the RFK Stadium site is held. And in terms of how people are voting, it's still a little too close to call. I think Wendell has something like a 300 vote lead in that range. It's whose vision for that site is going to win. And right now it's his, as opposed to his opponents. So that's kind of the thing that we're keeping tabs on. In terms of all the other races, it's same old, right? All the incumbents won, kind of low-ish turnout. And so is that a reflection that council is doing a good job, or is it that no one is open to competing? We had Mayor Bowser on the podcast a week or so ago, and she was like, when I was running, it was 15 people all at once, and that's just not the case anymore. So I think the question in that regard is do people actually feel like they want to run for those seats and change things?
Hey everyone. So I would align with Mitch in terms of the lack of surprise in terms of the incumbents winning. I do think, though, if you look at the issues, specifically crime and the public safety concerns that we had last year, I think conventional wisdom might say, well, voters are going to look at who's in office right now and say, maybe we want to go with someone different because our council member is not responding to this issue in the way that we want. We see that evidence through some of the recall efforts that are taking place on races that were not on the ballot this year. However, the incumbents won, I think, so handily across the board, it does make you think, well, are residents truly blaming their council members for crime? And I think that is an interesting dialogue in context with the recall efforts going on right now. So I'd love to just talk more about that and learn more about what residents are thinking as we head toward the general, because crime has trended down this year, but last year was a banner issue. So we'll have to keep watching that.
Very good. I'm not going to hold that if you could hear me. I think my voice will do it. Can you hear me? Stunning. First, how about that? Is that good? Well, I think there were some interesting things that happened. Obviously, in Ward 7, the more moderate progressives on the council, or the more moderates, are very happy that Ebony Payne is not going to win. It appears not to win because she ran against the football stadium coming to RFK site. Wendell Felder has taken a much more nuanced position, which means he's persuadable to support it, and it's the #1 issue for the mayor in this current term. I think it's interesting that Trayon White had 2 not really well-known opponents, one of whom was the former principal of Ballou, but Trayon just barely got 52% of the vote against 2 moderate, not well-known candidates. And Trayon still hasn't been able to count his campaign dollars to anyone's satisfaction, including the Board of Elections. Robert White coasted to victory as we all expected, because this is not a race for the at-large race for him. This is the beginning of his race for mayor in 2 years, next year. I noted on WAMU's Politics Hour that Robert White has been on the ballot 5 times in 10 years. And sometime this time next year, he will announce his campaign for mayor for 2026. And the question is whether someone like Kenyon McDuffie will jump into that race. Let's see, there's some other people. They're talking about candidates running in Ward 7. There were 10 candidates. I think when Alyssa Silverman ran, maybe there were 23 or something. We're in a position where you can win a fraction of the vote and still get elected. Felder's ahead. It's like 22% to 20% to the 2 candidates behind him. That gives some impetus to people who support Initiative 83, which is ranked choice voting, because we keep having people elected who represent maybe 1/5 of the electorate. I will point out the chairman of the council, Phil Mendelson, was first elected to the council in 1998, and he won with 17% of the vote. And I'm sorry, Bill Rice, the official chronicler of all things political with his camera, is not here, because that year in 1998, I was going to point out, he got 14% of the vote. We almost had him as a council member. And then I think just going forward, I think the NFL decision whether or not to bring the NFL back to DC is a huge issue, which we'll get into. And I think the mayor's very happy that Wendell Felder has apparently won. Because Vince Gray, who didn't run because of health reasons, was a very strong supporter of bringing the team back. And the post-poll shows 76% of the people in its poll would like to see the team back. They don't want the NFL to run over the district, but they want the team back. Sorry to talk so long. All my answers won't be that long.
Good afternoon. First, I'll say a couple things preliminarily. I have what I believe is a very dynamic now city reporter, Sam Collins, who I really wish was sitting in this seat today besides me. So next year we'll make sure that he gets here. And secondly, when you say that, our views don't necessarily reflect the views of our employer, I don't know how I'm going to step out of that employer role, because I am my employer. So anyway, what I would say that disappointed me so much about this election is that the candidate that won was nobody, because the city did not come out to vote. The numbers are dismal, and it really disturbs me to see where DC is headed, particularly as we have a presidential election looming over us and further threats to our democracy here, not only in the nation, but particularly in the District of Columbia. Secondly, when it comes to the Ward 8 race, we added, I think, about 4,000 new voters. 6,000?
Registered in the ballpark area?
In the ballpark area. The turnout was about, 4,000, I think? I don't know. I don't have the numbers in front of me. So even with those new registered voters, there was no real interest in participating in this primary. I would say, as a resident of Ward 8, the 2 candidates that opposed the incumbent, one had been campaigning for a complete year. His name recognition was really wide, and I think the principal, Rolark-Barnes branch, began to rise towards the end as people began to listen to him a little bit more and recognizing that they had a choice. The incumbent came out really late in announcing that he was going to run for re-election. And the question is, when you talk about issues, crime really was not at the top of the list. And one of the candidates stressed housing. The other one stressed education. All of those, I think they were trying to convince voters result in issues related to crime, but that was not the number one issue. So I woke up in a really bad mood yesterday morning. Really bad mood. Not that I oppose the incumbent or anything as a journalist. I cannot do that, but it was just the numbers. And so Ward 7, I think it was a good race. Of course, people are still questioning whether the endorsement by council member, why am I drawing a blank already? Gray was actually his endorsement. There's some questions about that and who's running the office. But, his staff is really steadfast on saying he's still running his office and that was his decision. I think otherwise, the election was rather lackluster. It's amazing to me to talk to people, when I think about how much money and resources the Board of Elections is putting into our election season. Everything from mailing ballots to having early voting. I mean, some of the folks that worked at these polls were complaining that they stood there for days and, less than 100 people showed up. And so there are questions about, do we really need to continue to invest all these dollars in elections that people don't really feel that much interested in? So it's as district residents, as a native Washingtonian, I am very, very concerned as a result of this election, which surprised me that it would be so greatly ignored.
But there wasn't a mayor's race. There wasn't a council chairman's race.
Right. But there was one thing that happened that you haven't commented on, although you answered like my next three questions. But one thing you haven't touched on is, as you know, despite opposition in the U.S. House of Representatives seeking to ban the practice, local legislation permitted non-citizen residents of the District of Columbia to vote for the first time in this primary election. So can someone comment on how that went? And I don't know that it's maybe too soon to talk because the results aren't all in, but did it have any effect? Did it have any effect on the outcome of the election?
Maybe somebody knows the answer to this, but there's something like 500 people registered who are not citizens of the district. But I don't know, however, when they vote, are they going to be singled out with a blue stamp or something that we'll know they voted? I'm not sure how we'll actually know about that. Of course, the Republicans on the House would take away home rule if they could, which is a danger for this November election. But I don't know that we can track how they actually voted, but maybe the Board of Elections can do that in the weeks to come to see where they registered and if they voted.
I thought, Michael, in one of your articles, you interviewed somebody who was a local resident, non-citizen.
Wasn't me. I might have been named on that story, but I didn't talk to them. However, there were some concerns about threats made toward the Board of Elections or phone calls from people who are upset about this law that went into effect. Obviously, that's not the Board of Elections' fault. They're like, look, we're just doing what the law is telling us to do here. But with that in mind, I don't think there were any interruptions at the polls or anything that went awry with that process. But I think Tom's right. We're not probably going to know the answer to the question of did they affect the election unless the board gives us some data to help illustrate that.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's turn to the bigger question let's talk about Trump for a little bit. So Trump was convicted in New York of 34 felony counts of falsifying documents in connection with hush money payments. Meanwhile, the case against him in DC for federal election interference seems to be lagging. What's up with that, and how likely is it that case will proceed to a trial before the election?
You have to call on somebody.
All right. One of you has written about this, I think. At least your name appeared. I didn't make this up.
I can give a short answer.
Tom.
Most people know following these 4 cases. It looks like maybe none of them will actually get to a trial case before November. I think that if you have a candidate who's convicted of a felony, that's good enough to decide. I don't know that the other cases will make a big difference, even though they may be more important into the managing of the country.
Okay, I saw a press release this week that said that the DC case is probably the most likely of any of them to be heard before the election, just because I think there's one issue the immunity issue, which is the only issue that's holding up that case from going to trial.
Mm.
But
And maybe the Supreme Court's going to rule on the immunity issue.
yeah, that's right.
Someday,
That's right.
sometime in this century.
Okay, so let's switch then to another topic that's been in the news a lot. Mayor Bowser is a strong home rule and statehood supporter, and yet she bowed to the demands of Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill to bring in the Metropolitan Police to quell protests at the GW campus over the Hamas-Israel war. How do we make sense of that?
Well, the only thing I always see the mayor in a really hard spot because, I mean, when it comes to crime across the city, people on the one hand are saying defund the police, let's control our own, jurisdiction, the mayor's on the side of that. But then at the same time, there's this in the immediately there's this, we need the police. We need the help of the police. I don't know if this is answering your question. So I can see politically where the mayor would position herself, especially, and I don't know if you all have had a chance to see the film, The Sixth. If you haven't, I would suggest that you see it. But immediately when some things are just, kind of out of the district's control, and so, to have that other voice to address an issue that really was a private issue. It was on a campus. So, I mean, MPD, I don't even know if MPD had jurisdiction.
It was
on the
private
campus.
property.
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
GW also has their own campus police, and Bowser originally said like GW is a private campus.
Yeah.
They can send in their own private police if they want to. I will say that she did send in the police. I think it was like the night before or like that morning before she was supposed to head to the Hill to testify. I imagine that those two things are kind of linked. Obviously, it's too much to be a coincidence in my mind. I would imagine that had something to do with it too. The optics of it are just a little too.
Well, that's a popular feeling.
Yeah.
I do know that the GW is a private campus. It has this very small campus police, but that's like the library police. And it can ask the DC police to come in and remove unwanted people from them. I'm talking to lawyers, my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. It can ask the police to come in. The police who have, despite what happened in 2020 and the George Floyd riots and disturbances and how they behave there, overall, they have a pretty good reputation on how to handle major demonstrations. They handle a lot of them throughout the year. And the president of the university wanted the police to come in to make certain something bad didn't happen. The police were of the view that we're not going to aggressively do this. I have spoken to some of the GW membership, and they've said to me the reason they did it that early morning is because they had specific information that what were there 6 GW students out of all the ones who were on the campus, and that there was specific information that calls had gone out to bring more people to the campus, and that they were looking over assessing buildings where they could take over a building. I think it was at Columbia and other places. And the police decided they wanted to stop that before it started, and that's why they decided to throw it out. Did it happen on the day that the mayor was called up to the Hill to talk to the right-wing Republicans about how she should crack heads? Yes, it did. But there's some indication that I've seen from internal notes that that was more incidental than it appears, but I share your skepticism.
Anyone else?
I think it's sort of an interesting question of how the mayor's alignment with Republicans on the Hill hurts her politically. I don't know that I have a firm answer for that, but when they repealed the DC criminal code overhaul, she was essentially supported that effort, and I don't know that it does hurt her politically, to be honest. I'd be interested in what the rest of you think about that.
I don't think the mayor supported the Congress overturning the law, but she warned that the Congress would overturn the law, and the council pretty much ignored her.
And she didn't do much to stop it. She didn't
There was nothing
use her
she could
influence.
Well, that was some of the criticism early on was that she didn't sign onto those letters that were sent by the chair, I think the Attorney General first. And people did wonder, well, do you support it? Are you against it? Because you, as you noted in your question, come out as a statehood advocate, pro home rule. To be silent on the issue was something that confounded people. So we've seen that kind of tug of war with Congress continue. And it's interesting when they choose, they want to impose their will, and it puts the mayor in a bind constantly.
And wasn't the transfer of the RFK land before that, the House Republicans at the same time? So maybe she made a choice.
All right. So Eleanor Holmes Norton yesterday released a press report, press statement talking about all of the riders that were attached to DC's appropriations bill this year. And there are a ton of them. I mean, there's everything from prohibiting non-citizen voting, of course, can't spend local funds on abortion. There was something against adopting California's vehicle emission standards, and even prohibiting anything that allows right turns on red. So it's very, very detailed. But remarkably, there was no marijuana rider this time. So what would it mean for DC and the current cannabis market if DC is not prohibited any longer from regulating marijuana, and DC is allowed to fully implement an adult use cannabis market? Anybody want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I think we're in this extremely weird gray area where you can buy a t-shirt and the gift is the weed, right? Like that's, it's weird to me. It should be, if you're going to have it, people are going to indulge in it no matter what you do. People like doing psychedelics. They like drinking alcohol. They like doing all this stuff. So is there a way to do it in a safe and less harmful way? And if that's true, and this rider is not attached, I imagine DC would come out and say, okay, yes, you can purchase weed, but it has to be hopefully verified in a certain way. Like, where are you growing it? Is it contaminated with anything? Is there, a way to make sure that the stuff that people are ingesting is as safe as it's going to be? I think the rider is going to get tacked on again, though. I mean, it's too easy of a win, and given everything that's already attached, it's an easy punching bag already. Like, that's what DC has been for forever. And so tacking back on a marijuana rider feels like an easy win for Republicans to just be like, oh, well, we were thinking about compromising on this, but actually, no, we're not going to compromise. Not that there's compromise to be had anyways,
Yeah, it feels like every year we get stories. Oh, the Harris rider is gone, and then they put it back in there at the last minute. But if it stays out, I mean, there are I know of at least I think definitely one pending piece of legislation that has already had hearings. I think from Chairman Mendelson that could pass fairly quickly and would stand up a recreational market and all the regulations and restrictions and taxes that go along with it.
Yeah, I mean, things would get a lot simpler. The council has tried, I would say every half year, there's probably some legislation aiming to rein in the gray market. And it's just been kind of, I wouldn't quite say a comedy of errors, but they keep having to correct the issue over and over through emergency legislation. And it's out of control. Residents complain about it. And, just to be able to rein that issue in would make things a lot simpler for the council, so they don't have to keep trying to, through emergency legislation, fix a market that is completely, I would say, unstabilized currently.
This is another example of how the city is subject to the whims of Congress. If they wanted a Ferris wheel on top of the Wilson building, it could dictate it. We'd have a Ferris wheel on top of the Wilson building. But when it comes to marijuana, we have lost, I want to say tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, because David Grosso was the council member who first pushed marijuana legalization. The conservatives on Capitol Hill, particularly the House, have blocked it. And what this means is if they don't wake up and put the restriction back in, well, guess what? The nation's capital will be just like every other state in the nation where it can regulate and tax marijuana. And that would be a nice thing to do.
I'll just say that when I was in law school, 20-some years ago, 30-some years ago, I don't know how long, we talked about this in the tobacco industry and how the tobacco industry was really going to push, the marijuana industry because, tobacco was being so regulated, and, now as a newspaper, they can't even advertise. But you can advertise in some markets, you can advertise marijuana. And then, of course, I think we've gone from the doctor, the medical, what do you call it?
Medical marijuana.
Yeah, but you can self-diagnose,
Yeah.
right?
right.
So you don't need a doctor's prescription anymore. You can just say, I can't sleep, right? Those who are in the business, I know that we have probably that I know of one east of the river owner who's been in business for quite some time is now struggling because she's in competition with so many of these other places where you get the T-shirt and the, a gift. So yeah, it's going to be a wild playing field. And now that it is going to be accessible, I think where we're going to see the big issues, which we haven't really talked about, is the areas of education, crime, with regards to, what's happening in neighborhoods and, this whole street thing we thought it gone away and hasn't. And with Congress being so, Republicans being so intense on how our city is out of control, they seem like they're okay with this. But yeah, when it comes to the riders, like you said, folks have been beaten up on the district forever. We're used to this, and we have to get what we can get.
There'll still be an illegal market for various drugs.
Oh, yeah.
One of my issues, things not covered, we are not there yet, is the fentanyl epidemic. But in terms of marijuana, it's we can be just like the rest of the country. What is it? 30 states now have some kind of marijuana regulation, and it would work well for the city if we figure out a way to control it. But we'll still have an illegal market. I could take you right now and where you could buy it without having to go into a store and buying a cheap T-shirt.
So is there a distinction? This is a question I have, and before we leave this, since I'm in a room of lawyers and I don't practice, but you mentioned cannabis, and we're talking about marijuana. So legally, what's the difference?
I
think it's
all the
same.
same.
It's the same as
Some of us old people say,
there's some. I think there's some
reefer.
I know,
We
that's
use-
right. I remember all that. So I guess
when,
I'm an old
when we
person.
write about weed or cannabis, we use the
Or
word
weed.
cannabis or weed and not marijuana. There's, I guess, somewhat recently, there's been some marijuana has been associated with some like racist tropes, I think, which is why we avoid using that word. But it all means the same thing. And I also, I guess, before we move on, it's probably notable, or we should note that is it the FDA or the DEA? The feds are working on thinking about probably going to reclassify cannabis as a lower tiered schedule,
Right.
which may have something to do with the Harris rider being not in there right now, but still, I think they'll probably sneak
That's
it back in
President
there.
Biden's proposal to the
Right.
FDA to knock it down from a first class to third class drug or whatever.
Yeah.
Another big issue before we move on is who's going to control the legal market?
Yeah.
We could see a whole different colorization of who runs marijuana in the city should it become legal.
That's right. All right, so let's talk crime and guns a little bit. So DC ended 2023 with crime on the rise, especially carjackings, violent crime, and homicides. Crime rates have started to fall this year, but that hasn't stopped the attacks from Republican members of Congress. Because DC's criminal justice system is mainly in federal hands, prosecutions are handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office, judges are appointed by the president, and the correctional system is run by the federal government. Is DC's local government really to blame for crime here? And what can DC actually do to protect residents from crime?
Well, the mayor certainly controls the police and is the police chief's boss. So the city has at least some responsibility in whatever crime does or does not happen. But as you mentioned, the feds control a large portion of it. So there's that requires some probably uniquely difficult collaboration.
In terms
I'm
of
trying not to talk too much.
For sure.
in terms of what can be done legislatively by the council was the question, or was it just by
What
city
can
leaders?
DC do locally to control crime here, since most of the tools are held by federal government?
Right. Well, obviously, we can't dictate what the federal government does as far as prosecutions, though. What we can make changes to the law. We can classify what different types of crimes are. We saw them do that through the omnibus legislation that the council passed earlier this year, that the mayor backed. So there are things that they can do legislatively, but it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that to pin it all on one lawmaker or just the mayor, I think most residents are smarter than that to know it is a complex system. But if you're in a debate, you're trying to boil down the issue, you see that finger pointing, and it doesn't help that our city leaders at times point the finger at each other. You have the Attorney General, which handles civil crimes and juvenile crimes. You have the USAO, which handles adult felonies. And then you have, the police, which, as Mitch noted, the mayor controls that department. So it depends on who you're asking sometimes what can be done about crime and who's to blame.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that like getting your crime lab reaccredited is probably a good start. There's been issues with it forever. And, they finally are trying to get the thing up and running. But I mean, you got to start there, because one of the things that they want to do is prosecute people. And you can't do that without the science and the data to back it up. And so that is definitely where some of the blame lays. Obviously not all of it. Although I think if you were to ask the recall Charles Allen folks, they would say Charles Allen is to blame for every single thing on planet Earth.
Yeah, I'll do my 1 minute time and give you your 5.
I'll correct you. If you're wrong, I'll correct you.
That's good. I like correction. But anyway, no, I think that, if you talk to the chief, she's working really hard to bring on new officers. I mean, I think the budget has been allows for that. So we're seeing more police, which some folks don't particularly care for. I think the call for, again, more programs. Everybody says we got to do something to keep these kids, off the street. We've got to get them engaged. We've got to do whatever. I mean, just about every government agency that I can think of is now stepping up to provide programs to nonprofit organizations that are really working to address crime in the communities. And so there's a lot of funding that's out there for some of these small agencies that are nonprofits that are working particularly with young people. And also we still have to deal with the issue of poverty, which is what the Ward 8 council members would say, how do we bring more resources to the community to support families. The mayor's taken a very tough stand, as has the chief. If your kids are not in school, if they're not, doing what they're supposed to do, there's a chance that the parents themselves will be held accountable. But then how do we manage, these households that are caught up in this foster care system and all kinds of things that really don't support families. So, there's, I think everybody is just throwing darts at a board and trying to see, what sticks and who hits the bullseye. And I don't think anybody's hit it yet. But I think that because of the fact that we have seen a reduction in crime, nobody wants to celebrate that yet. They're afraid to celebrate it because too many people are still being impacted by the crime that's happening in our communities, especially in my neighborhood.
I think the big picture is that we have a fractured judicial law enforcement system. There's no doubt about it. But if you just say, well, that's the problem, then you only have long-term solutions. I do want to point out that after the horrific George Floyd murder in 2020 by the police, there was a move to change the nature of policing in the city. Crime is a health problem, not a crime problem. Policing, we have too many police. We need fewer police. Well, in fact, we have fewer police now. We have, depending on how you count them, anywhere from 500 to 700 fewer officers. And I've never been to one community meeting in the city where the residents of that community said, well, we don't want any more police. What they want is better policing. And so there is going to be some uptick in policing now. But on the other side, people say violence interruption programs are needed. This program is needed, that program is needed. But there's no assessment of whether those programs work. The mayor says the $125 million plus dollars go out to various community groups. And how do we know they're working? And if you talk to somebody who's doing violence interruption, she'll tell you, well, if this young person here comes to our meeting on a Friday night and doesn't commit a crime, there's no statistic for that. There are only statistics for the crimes that are committed. So it's very hard to judge how well violence interruption programs are working or not working, and who's running them, who's getting the money, those types of things. I've said on the COJO program, when Charles Allen has come in and defended the fewer police and other issues, I'm for any violence interruption program that you can think of. Let's try it. I also believe that you have to have policing. It doesn't do any good to have a lab to test things if there's no police getting the evidence to bring to the lab or to the prosecutors to bring to the lab. So the fact that the president appoints our judges, appoints our chief prosecutor, the U.S. attorney, we don't pay for that. If we were become a state, we would have to pay the nearly $1 billion a year to run the public safety program in this country. I mean, in this city. But it's so fractured, it's very difficult to try to get all the horses running in one direction when there's no one in charge. And just Brian Schwab, who I can say I believe is going to run for re-election. He won't say that yet, but I will. He has asked that there be a complete redo of the youth, what's it, the DYRS division, Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. Hate bureaucratic names. There's no place if you pick up a juvenile now and they come from a home that is not a stable home, and you don't want to send them back there because that's why they're out to begin with. There's virtually no place to put them. They are foster. Most of the foster parents in this city live in the suburbs in Maryland. We have not built an infrastructure where you don't warehouse juveniles, but you give them second chances. And this year, the carjacking is down this year. I have distinctly noticed that the fear of crime has dropped substantially, particularly in white neighborhoods, because we have fewer carjackings. But last year, in that historic year, you could be anywhere in town at any time of day and be carjacked. So much so that the former Attorney General, Karron, told the Washington Post in your story that he would not get gasoline in the District of Columbia if he could avoid it, that he would not let the mother of his children buy gasoline in the district because he was afraid. The Attorney General of the city was afraid of being carjacked. And he was a black man too, so you can imagine how white people felt.
I would get sad looking hyper locally, notwithstanding the federal component of this. The big criticism I've always heard with DC's programs, and Denise touched on this, is the amount of money we have going into all the various violence reduction efforts. And as Tom noted, it's tough to measure whether they truly work. So you saw the council this year, as a last minute amendment to the omnibus crime bill I mentioned earlier, mandate the mayor to create a comprehensive crime plan, which you would think we would have something like that already, but we don't. And it gets back to this kind of bickering between agencies. You have redundancies. You have programs that have similar descriptions and do similar things. You have things that the mayor has started that no longer exist, although they might still have a website. So it's almost impossible to keep track of guess how much they've thrown at the wall on the crime issue. So the council's trying to do something about it. At least they put it on paper so we can all get with the program.
You know, I point out Karl Racine created something called Cure the Streets as part of his thing, and to take specific blocks, if not neighborhoods, blocks, where he would work on crime reduction. The mayor saw that, and then she created the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, typically long bureaucratic name, Cure the Streets in that name. And there was a proposal that these two organizations will merge, so there will be some administrative savings in organization, but they cannot yet agree on how to do it, so it hasn't happened yet.
Well, one of the things I would just add as one who's, there's one of those programs is right next door to my office, and we've talked to them. I heard there was a fight yesterday, and one of the, what do you call them? The mediation folks, I forget the name you just mentioned. I heard him holler, say, "I'm not going to do this job anymore. I'm not out here to stop fights." I'm thinking, okay. That was a job.
That's why they're there.
That was a job announcement. But, you know, again, I look at what some of the agencies are doing. I mean, just look at the Department of Recreation now at Berry Farms. They're doing midnight basketball. You know, not that they haven't done that before, but I think all of the DC government now is with every agency that has a relationship, particularly to young people in the city, is creating opportunities for them to be more engaged in productive, fun, learning activities. And I don't think we talk enough about that from a press perspective. I just think we don't. So there's another point I was going to make too. Oh, about the gas. Yeah, I don't go to a gas station in DC either, Tom, but that's because I'm getting robbed at the tank. So, you know, I make choices. But yeah, I mean, with the reduction in carjackings, I think it's really clear, you know, that we're beginning to see more of that. The question is now, what's happening to the carjacked victims and how the city is supporting them. And I'm really not sure. I heard a story, hint, hint, of a woman whose car was stolen, not carjacked, but stolen. She has 20 $150 tickets. And the police told her, oh, just wait till you get the tickets from Maryland. And so she's got to spend her time now trying to fight at, wherever you pay your tickets, to address this issue, you know. And I don't know if there is, hopefully, I think there's a way that can be resolved quickly, but I don't know, you know. They would not return a car. It was totaled because it had bullet holes in it. And so she had to get another car. But the point is, she's got to spend work time to fight these 20 $150 tickets. It's the repercussions.
There are a lot of victims of crime which don't get as much mention as prosecution and consequences for those committing the crimes,
Right.
whether it's the 13-year-old juvenile or the senior citizen ripping off people in the senior citizen home. There's a broad range, and victim services talked about, but the money is not there.
All right. Before we jump to the audience, I do want to ask an economic question. We haven't talked about economics in the city. There's a new budget that just came out, and there's some winners and losers in the new budget because our revenue is expected to decline because we're not getting the COVID funding that we used to get. Can you talk about some of the winners and losers and also kind of weave in affordable housing, rebuilding downtown DC, and bike lanes?
We take those one at a time. Rebuilding downtown is a lot bigger.
Oh my God.
All right. Well,
Which of these questions do you want to take?
I want to talk about downtown and the redevelopment of the city and how downtown will be part of it.
Agreement on that?
Yep.
Okay, so go ahead.
Well, the big news for the mayor and the citizens was that she gets a mulligan on the arena because the governor of Youngkin of Virginia was this stupid rich white guy who didn't understand how to talk to a black woman in Portsmouth, Virginia, who ran the finance committee, Louise Lucas. And so we have a second chance on that, and the mayor's building around that to build a downtown. It looks like the federal government.
Some people can't hear you. They can't.
Still can't hear? Jesus. This is such a fancy building to have such a lousy mic system. Put that on the record.
We have mics in the ceiling all around listening to us.
That's kind of cool.
Here, do you want?
But maybe we should be like the UN with earphones. Anyway, I'll finish up. No, I don't need it. I just have to
It's really
carry this thing. Looks like a Snickers candy bar. The economics of the city is changing. Downtown is changing. Look around this neighborhood. It's amazing what's happened. But we're still 50% at best of people come in to work on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. So what is downtown going to be? You can't just turn commercial buildings into residential. One, is very difficult to do financially. And two, who wants to live downtown where nothing's going on? So there's a big issue there. And I just had this talk with Nina Albert, the deputy mayor for economic development, who's overseeing a lot of the things. If you think about the perimeter of the city, of what's happening, where I live down near the wharf, from there, what the mayor plans for the Anacostia River, what's happening at Walter Reed up 16th Street. What's happened, Georgetown is even starting to make some comeback. Some edges of downtown. You can see that the city economically is developing around the region, and the downtown is delayed. And so what happens there will be interesting. She's trying to create an arts district and then the entertainment district around the arena. So there's a dramatic change occurring there. And of course, her run for a fourth term is in part based on whether she can make progress on all of these events and bring the football team back to town.
I think if you look anecdotally at the downtown, even just comparing last year to this year, you see more people out and about. At least that's my experience. And you talk to people, and I think they feel things coming back. So to that,
At nights too.
at nights too, as Tom says. So in that to that extent, you have to give the mayor some credit for what she's done so far. Tourism is up; things are looking better in certain regards. As far as the budget's concerned, the council has tried to trim some of the money the mayor wanted for downtown's revitalization. I think the chairman stripped, I don't remember the exact amount, it might have been 10 million over the course of 2 years for creating a greenway connecting some of the parks downtown. And the chairman's criticism is that's not expedient enough to remedy the problems we're having filling those buildings, as Tom mentioned, that are vacant. So we'll see if that sticks in the final version of the budget the council is going to look at next week. But ultimately, things have gotten better downtown, but the mayor still seeks to add thousands more residents down there. So my biggest question with that has been, who are those residents going to be, especially when we look at the socioeconomic status of folks and how much it costs to live downtown and the lack of amenities there? What's the appeal to moving downtown? And I don't think that question has been fully answered yet.
Let me ask you very quickly. I want to mention, since you mentioned the chairman, who fusses about $7 or $8 million here or there. He did put in the budget, and I'm thinking, unless you read the Business Journal, you didn't know it, that the District of Columbia government is going to buy National Theater. If any of you have been to National Theater, not Warner, but the National Theater right there at 13.5 Pennsylvania Avenue. The city's going to buy it for $5 million, which is way under what you would think that what the market value would be. And then it's going to authorize at least $6 million to renovate the National Theater. And then they're going to turn it over to the nonprofit that is running National Theater to run it. Now, I bitched, pardon the expression, at the mayor at the chairman on the politics hour about why he didn't announce that was going on. He just snuck it in the Budget Support Act, if you're looking for it. But it sounds like a good idea, a way to change downtown, to use some city money to renovate an old facility, to make it more attractive to traveling shows right around the corner from the Warner, create that entertainment district. What I don't like about it is the secrecy around the things that the city does with the budget. And that's an ongoing fight some of us are having with the chairman of the council. And it's not ended yet.
All right, so let's jump to the audience and see if you have any questions. I have a whole lot more questions if we don't have any. All right, Anne.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the initiative process.
Do you need to speak into the mic?
Yes. I can read.
I got the mic.
Oh, okay. Yes. Wilcox, co-chair of the community, and hello. I wanted to ask you to comment on the initiative process, not just how the new initiative around voting, ranked choice voting, and open primaries, limited open primaries, how that could be implemented, but also about the phenomenon we've had lately of initiatives sort of being passed because you have good organizers like Adam Eidinger who know how to get initiatives passed, and then how are those integrated into local policy?
Anyone want to take that?
Only thing I want to say about the initiative that just really concerns me, and it goes back to my initial reaction about the election turnout on Tuesday, is that I don't think there has been enough public education, promotion, conversation about the initiative, particularly in the farthest corners of the city. And so now that we've had a primary, it might be a good opportunity now to really let residents know or help to bring them up to speed on an initiative that may appear on, on the ballot in November. And, so they don't go in skipping that question.
I spoke with the individual, Lisa Rice, who introduced Initiative 83 yesterday, because I really wanted her thoughts on the Ward 7 race, considering we had these 10 candidates and the winner might have no more than low 20s in the percentage of the vote they win with. And she's like, it's a case study on why I want to do this. And she tried to make her case to residents as they exited voting booths in Ward 7. And they were saying, well, I really liked this person, and I just wish I could have voted for this person as well. And she's like, well, you could be able to do that in the fall if you sign my petition. So we'll see how that goes. And if it ultimately makes it on the ballot, I assume it will. But I think it's a good question, because you have seen in recent election cycles these kind of banner initiatives, often led by the same core group of individuals who I think have kind of gotten a formula down on how to get these things on the ballot. And I agree with Denise that there has not been enough education on what ranked choice voting is, because it's complicated how it works specifically. So some voters, I think, just bristle at the idea of not selecting one person. But if you look at Ward 7 and the difficult choices people have to make there, and you see this in other races where you have many candidates, oftentimes they're all Democrats, aligned on maybe 90% of issues. How do you decide on one person over another? So I think that conversation is going to really ramp up as we get toward November.
And frankly, if an initiative is something that citizens have gathered together to present to the people, it's up to the groups who want the law to change is to make the campaign. That's why it's called a campaign. They have to go out, whether you like it or not. As a journalist, for me, whether I like ranked choice voting or not, whether I like the recall of Charles Allen or not, whether I like the recall of Brianne Nadeau or not, it's up to the people who are doing it. I'll test your old memories here. I was once giving a talk at DuPont Circle, and an ANC commissioner stood up in this room of hundreds of people and said, why don't you cover us? The ANCs are the foundation of democracy in the city. Why don't you cover us? And I politely said, it's not my job to cover you. It's your job to do something to make me cover you. And the person walked up to me after that meeting. It was David Catania, before his now job as a big lobbyist.
All right, anyone else want to answer that before we go to the next question? Okay, we have another question here.
I'm Fritz Molhauser, an attorney in DC. A hidden actor not covered in the press, but yet waiting in the wings to take a key role is the chief financial officer. As the budget moves towards final passage, it seems to me unresolved and certainly uncovered by the press whether he's going to, Mr. Glenn Lee, lawyer up and fight the district's past budget for not involving replenishment of rainy day funds, as he said was legally required. I've heard different views about whether the Attorney General opinion is sound or not, that's not a winning argument. What's your view of the likely action of the CFO on the DC budget yet to be passed?
May I ask you a question? How do you know about this?
It's discussed sotto voce around the Wilson building, and the CFO announced that he had retained counsel in order to pursue his independent legal options.
The reason I'm asking, when someone says it hasn't been, I think you said something like it hasn't been reported or reported on very much, it's gotten fairly good stuff. The short answer is the mayor, the chairman, and Glenn Lee, the CFO, who is the independent CFO, specifically by law in Congress, had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they discussed this. The CFO contends that the city has about $217 million in spent reserve funds that need to be put into this 2025 budget that starts October the 1st. Chairman Mendelson, and the mayor said, no, we can take care of this over a 4-year period. The Attorney General, who is trying to raise his profile before he runs for re-election, weighed in and said that the CFO does not have to certify the budget passed by the council. The CFO has to certify the mayor's budget that she presents to the council. But the fact is, Mendelsohn, when he did this budget, he reached a compromise in his own mind, and I'll leave that to you to figure out what that is, that he'll take care of the budget over a 4-year period, these reserve funds. Will that satisfy the CFO? He may still write a letter, even if he's not legally required to certify the budget. His job is to keep track of the budget.
Right.
And if the council passes the budget as it is now, you can expect him to write his annual letter, and he will just mention that he thinks that the reserves are not properly being taken care of. And that will be a red flare to the Republicans on Capitol Hill to hold up the district budget. Now, if he's satisfied with Mendo's little fuzzy spreading the money out over surplus monies and other things over 4 years, he won't say anything. But it's a good question because we don't know yet what he's going to do. He won't tell us yet.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, we have another question here in the front row.
Hello, my name is Jaden Klubeck. I'm a GW law student and I'm a summer associate at the DC Attorney General's Office, Commercial Division. And my question is about affordable housing. Specifically, what do you think about how the DC government can greater incentivize affordable housing, especially in areas of our city where they are not currently meeting the mayor's affordable housing benchmarks for 2025. Thank you.
You said you're with the AG, the DC AG's office?
Yes.
Okay. Which Consumer Affairs?
Commercial Division.
Commercial Division. I'm not going to answer this question first.
I'm thinking. I mean, I live off of Connecticut Avenue, which has had a huge fight over years over this community center that is old and decrepit. And there's a section of neighbors who want it to be torn down and rebuilt. And the mayor has said, like, we want to come in and put affordable housing on this land. And then you have people from suburban Chevy Chase who are like, no, it will destroy the nature of that neighborhood. And that is a balance that I imagine people are trying to strike all over the city. I will say, I think our podcast generally turns into a commercial real estate podcast of how many buildings downtown are they going to try to convert from commercial to residential. There's data that's stipulated, I believe, that of all of the states, I think DC, in that data point, it qualified as a state, but not really, right? It has the most conversions of anywhere. It's doing it the fastest. So I think the question is, are there incentives to add affordable housing if you try to convert some of these commercial, units downtown into affordable housing? Is there some way to talk to the developers and say, hey, like, we have this cool idea, but X number of units must be affordable housing? Obviously, like, converting something from commercial real estate into an apartment complex is not easy. In some instances, it's actually cheaper to tear the building down than to just gut it. So I do wonder if, like, that is something that is on Mayor Bowser's radar. And I think, it is something that they are keeping tabs on, but.
I've talked to our administration about this, but the district, at one point, the mayor was putting $500 million in affordable housing a year. And it was initially 50, then it was 100, it was 100, and she had to cut it back this year because of the budget. The question I would ask is a long-term question. The $1 billion plus that we put into affordable housing, show me the houses.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just add to that I think one program that the mayor initiated, or the council that is working, is inclusionary zoning. And I've just personally come across a lot of young folks in the city who've been able to find rental properties in the district as affordable in these new developments because of IZ. And it seems as though they're ramping that up. So, but then in our community, and I say ours, I'm claiming it, east of the river, there's still the whole, we don't use the term gentrification anymore. And it seems like it's disappeared for some reason, but
that's because they're already there.
Okay, I have a neighbor. But anyway, yeah, but it seems as though, there's still the question of what's affordable, and people, I think, have just concluded that, some folks are just not going to be able to remain in the city because the cost of housing is so expensive, no matter where you live. But that is one program I think that is making a difference.
I would just add, you look at some of the housing, especially what's being built downtown or those apartment buildings and high rises, and it's like, okay, you have units here. Sometimes certain percentages are set aside to be affordable. The question is, affordable to whom?
Yeah.
And then if you're going to have some of those affordable units, are they suitable for big families? That's another thing I don't think it's talked about enough, especially with downtown, is how many families with children can realistically move into these buildings that are being cropped up. And it's a serious concern the council has started to talk about, trying to, in some of the incentives to convert these buildings downtown into residential, making sure there's certain numbers of family size units as well, in addition to the affordability component.
Yeah, 3-bedroom apartments are very difficult to come by, and there's been an effort to have more of those. But again, you go back to the money is spent for housing in the city. I've just never seen the DC auditor, the inspector general, any member of the DC council assess how the money has been spent and how could it be better spent. Obviously, giving tax breaks to people to provide more affordable housing is one way to do it. But in some of these inclusionary zonings, you might have an apartment like the Wharf, I believe. I can't tell you how many hundreds of apartments or condos are down there, but the number that are set aside it's not very large. In a place for 100 or 200 apartments, you might have 17 that would be set aside. And then those often go to senior citizens who are, quote, less trouble for the landlord than a family with 3 or 4 kids who needs a 3-bedroom apartment. So do that as a school project and report back to me next month.
Well, we have a lot more questions. I must say, it's a very active audience. And so I'm going to encourage the journalists to stay after. And so some of these people can come up and ask you their questions. But I want to get back to our program. And I want to ask our final questions here. And my first question is, we have a podcaster joining us this year. And my question to the panel is, where do you think journalism is going? And where do you think it will be in 5 years?
Include the Washington Post.
Thanks, Bill.
Bill Rice, ladies and gentlemen, he got 14% of the vote in 1998. He could have been Phil Mendel.
With inflation, that's a majority.
Go ahead. Where's the media going to be in 5 years?
I have no idea. And I think, and I always kind of bristle at this question because I think the answer is nobody actually knows, right? Like you could have told people 10 years ago, oh, video is the future of media. Well, look at what happened to all the media outlets that went onto Facebook and posted videos and then realized, oh my God, we're not meeting our budgetary requirements, right? I think the future of media is what consumers want from their media. What is the thing that is actually valuable to them? Is it a podcast in our instance? Is it written? Is it radio? Is it video? I don't know. I think the question also would be down to like, are people willing to pay for that information? You have stuff like Twitter, X, whatever the heck it's called now, right? Where if you're a reporter, you're kind of like required to be on there, but you're also, if you're posting your stuff, you're giving your stuff away for free. It's a very kind of double-edged sword. And so I think to answer that question, the future of media is what do people actually want us to be covering? What is the stuff that matters to them the most in their community? Like that's why CityCast DC exists, is it was like, oh, well, there isn't really a local 20-minute podcast daily about specifically DC. That's the entire reason we exist. And I would also say, like, we have a membership program. Obviously, you don't need to be a member to subscribe to us. But there is a certain level of, do you think journalism should be a business or do you think it should be a not-for-profit? Like, those are huge meta questions and answers that I probably need a PhD to answer accurately. But I think the short answer is I don't know. I think it's what do people actually want the media to be? Do they want it to be fair and accurate? And what do they see it as and how it impacts their lives?
Yeah, I think the future, to sort of jump on what Julie was saying, the future depends on like if we can figure out a way to actually pay for it and pay for it sustainably. Every time, I don't know, since Facebook and Google and all the big tech companies have sort of come on the scene, every time media have like chased the algorithms and the revenue that comes along with, as Julia says, sharing our content on their platforms for free, it's burned us. The pivot for video burned us. The AI stealing essentially our content to build itself up is detrimental. There's lawsuits all over the place about about that stuff. So there are models out there that have shown some success. Julia mentioned the nonprofit model. I think that has some promise, though comes with restrictions. The Baltimore Banner is a sort of new on the scene, well-funded, are doing very good work. Nonprofit newsroom, ProPublica is sort of the shining example, but even so, is the Intercept a nonprofit? I don't know. They're like really
But
struggling.
I think Salt Lake Tribune switched from being for-profit to nonprofit to see how that would go.
And in my world, the alt weekly world, I believe it's the Chicago Reader, moved into nonprofit status and has at one point, I don't know if they stopped printing or printed twice monthly and back from a weekly schedule, and now they're a nonprofit now, and they seem to be doing well and are printing once a week again and hiring, and so there is hope. But I think, and there's also legislation I think that can address this. There's
hope not.
Controversial, no doubt.
Legislation I've seen.
The one in the council, I would agree with you, but there are some.
Denise Lewis George.
Yeah, the media credits. Tom
You give everybody $25 and you can give it to the media of your choice.
Right. It seems problematic. There is some I've read about in California where it requires companies like Google to share some of the revenue they get if they're sharing news content, which I think is maybe a little more palatable for folks like us. But anyway,
I would say that just you have to know that we, as human beings, we have more access to more information more quickly than we ever have had in the history of the human race. And then you ask yourself, why are so many people ignorant? Well, it's a real problem in that people don't know. If you do all the tests, all the testing, who knows what, who can name one president or anything like that, the answers are terrible. So we could maybe make it news nonprofit and have something like NPR. It's government, partially government backed. They will quickly tell you partially. I'm sure where we're going to be. I know where I'll be in 5 years, but I'm not sure where the media will go. We can't wait for people just to define it. You have to give them an opportunity with artificial intelligence and the creation of news and the distortion of news. We've got a lot of big things on our plates. I would just encourage you to support things like the Baltimore Banner. It's $26 a month, which is a lot more than I pay National Geographic, which is $2.99 a month. But there are places where you can get information Cardinal News, which is a Southwest news organization out by Roanoke, gives very good news about Virginia that you don't filter through the Washington Post or the Northern Virginia News. You have to seek out the places. You have to find your own news source and then support the ones you like.
I just want to jump in. And Tom, I think every point in history was a point when people had more access to information than they ever had in the history of, because we're constantly adding more resources for
Yeah, well, in the 40s and 50s, there was some pressure of not to report things.
Well, yeah, okay. So, but at any rate, we will be 60 years old this year. And when my dad died in 1994, I'm sure that he thought, and as a lot of people did, that the Washington Informer was going to die along with it. And I really miss those newspaper days. I miss them. But we still put our heart and soul into publishing a newspaper. I brought you all a couple of issues. I think what distresses me more is just like this election. That's why I was so depressed on Wednesday morning, because people don't want news. They don't like news. They're depressed by the news. They don't want to consume news. So what is it that we're doing in our storytelling, in our conveying of information that makes people want to come to us like they used to? There was a need that we had. And I mean, we ate breakfast, we prayed, and we read the daily newspaper. That's just something we did. We don't do that anymore. And so, I don't know where we're going to be. Like you said, in the next 5 years, I know that I'm going where time is going. Wherever you are, I'll be nearby and we'll debate issues because I'm looking forward myself to retiring from this. But young journalists, as you mentioned earlier, are still pouring into this industry. Journalism schools at one point I thought were closing. They're not. They're very, very, I think have a lot of young people who still want to pursue this craft.
They call them communication schools now.
Right. Because and we talked about that in a staff meeting today. Once you wrote a story, you turned it in and you walked away. Now you turn in a story, you got to do a video, you have to do social media, you have to do all these different things, which overwhelms me. But, the folks that are coming out of our schools now know how to do all of this. So with all of that, there's the technical part of that, but we cannot miss the storytelling. And when it comes to AI, which is what I've told a lot of folks, Black press, ethnic press evolved out of ignoring communities. AI will do the same thing unless we're in there feeding it information. Because at some point, we will write ourselves, all of us, depending on who we identify with, in addition to being American or being a reader, however else you identify, if that voice is not fed into AI, you won't exist. And so, that's why I embrace it. We have to be very careful about it, but I embrace it. So we'll hopefully still be printing a newspaper in 5 years, but we'll be doing other things as well.
Okay, I want to hear from Michael.
Yeah, we need to hear from Michael because the Washington Post is in an extraordinary upheaval, and you give us the inside story.
So I have one final question. We got to get to our crystal ball question.
The Post is.
I want to hear from Michael first.
Okay, yes, please do. Tell us the truth.
What I'll say is if anyone
No
knows,
fake.
if anyone knows the answer to the original question, please let my bosses know. Because we're figuring that out as well, where we're going to be in 5 years and how to get there. It's a struggle. If you've read about what's going on at the Post, you'll know it's not an easy answer. And we're throwing the best and brightest behind it, and we still have not cracked the code. I think there's a serious entitlement from people who are online, I think especially young people, and I don't blame them for having it, that they should be able to access information for free. I get that because so much of what's online is free. You can go on Wikipedia and you can learn whatever you want to learn for free. You can go on YouTube and watch 1 million videos for free. So why should I have to pay for information from a newspaper online? I get that. And there's been a lot of publications that have been mentioned in the past few minutes. So if I'm going to pay for one, then I have to pay for another, and I'm still going to pay for my Spotify and Hulu. Like, come on, this is just not the economy to have 3 news subscriptions on top of whatever else you're paying for. So the revenue for profit model, I think, is one that is kind of crumbling right now, but you have to pay the journalists for their work. So I don't really know what to do either. I think, though, there's no shortage of young people who are still committed to this craft. And I think we're going to see more and more people just seek to publish information on their own online behind their own paywalls, whether that's through a blog or a podcast or some other way that they can kind of take control of their own careers and narratives. I don't know if that's going to generate money for them, but they can at least have control of their own destiny and what they put out there. So I think we'll see more independent journalism. I think podcasts have enabled that to some degree, but I think also the advent and rise of social media has enabled that to some degree. So What is a journalist is another interesting question.
Well, we hope you'll all be here next year and we'll revisit that question and we'll push it out another 5 years. But before we go, very briefly, our crystal ball question that Tom's been waiting for. What is the most underreported story of the year so far? What do you predict is the next hot story? And this is the most important one. If you had your druthers, what story would you devote more time to? So let's start with Denise, and then do Tom, and then Michael, and then Julia, and then Mitch.
So I only know the first question you asked. The rest of them went past me. So and I didn't write it down. But I think right now for me, one of the most underreported stories is the victims of the violence that has happened in DC. Those who have been either, and we did this once before, but sort of the stories of those, as you see people in wheelchairs and what have you, what have their lives been like since that? They're more mature now. What are they having to say about the crime spree that we went through, and how have their lives changed? I'll just stop there.
Okay, thank you. Tom?
I think the most underreported story is the opioid fentanyl deaths.
Opioid.
I'm sorry, Bill. Oh. I think the most underreported story is the opioid fentanyl deaths affecting, according to the most recent study or show, middle-aged Black men in their 40s and 50s. I think one of the most, I forgot, what's the sequence? That's the most underreported. What were the other two?
What do you predict is the next hot story? And if you had your druthers, what story would you devote more time to?
I think the effort by the mayor and the National Football League, not the new owners, but the National Football League itself, to come to the district again is a huge story. It's waiting for some action in Congress, and if that logjam is broken, right now it's only not moving because Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen has essentially put a hold on it. And so it means that the House voting to turn all that federal land over to the district is on hold until they can get Chris Van Hollen to take his foot off the neck of the legislation. And should that happen, I believe that the move to get the NFL back into DC is going to be a big deal. The question will be whether the NFL, rich as it is, trying to become international, will come into the district as a partner with the city and to bring ancillary economic development around it for affordable housing, grocery stores, recreational space, or will it come in like a Bigfoot and just stomp on the district, in which case I'd be directly opposed to it. But that's going to be a very big story. And I think we should all pay a great deal of attention to that, because if the logjam breaks on Capitol Hill, I think you'll see it move very quickly.
You done?
Yeah, and I got some more to say, but I'll stop.
I think one thing underreported right now, or I'd like to read more about, is the city's changing population, especially as the mayor's trying to bring in thousands of more residents. There's always talk about displacement, but I'd love to read more and learn more about who we're losing or who we've lost so far and where they're going. DC's always been considered a transient city, but so much changed during the pandemic. And we've had some census data show a lot of different trends over the past 5 years or so. So I'd love to learn more and read more about that. I think what's going to be the next big story, and it started to bubble up this budget cycle, is waste in the city's government. We touched on that a little bit with the spending with some of the government and violence prevention programs, but there are some lawmakers who are starting to home in on this more. But when we talk about budget cuts and the size of our budget, which grows every year and is now around $21 billion, it begs the question of, well, how much scrutiny are we really giving to some of these human services programs that we're saying are strained and we're in the red millions and millions of dollars. So I think that's going to bubble up, especially ahead of next year's, as we get to the next mayoral race, especially that'll be an issue. And the third issue, or at least if I had clones or something like that, I would have dove in more deeply into this year's budget. I think there's a trend within the press, and that's partly because we get the information the day before or 2 days before about what's in the contents of the budget. We rely on the chair. We rely on lawmakers to tell us what's important or to show us what's important through issues that they argue. But the truth is there are the devil is in the details. And with this year also being a primary year, I know personally I didn't spend enough time with those documents, or at least as much as I would have liked to. And you can really miss out on some interesting things that lawmakers do very covertly through budget moves. So I think that would be my answer for the last question.
Dang, I feel like everyone took the first two very easily because I agree with everything. If I had more bandwidth, I know one thing that I would really love to report on actually is that the RFK Stadium site is in a floodplain. And that actually means that the insurance is different and how it gets funded is going to be very different. And so I would love to devote time and resources to figuring out how Sam Harris is going to try to finagle money out of DC tax dollars and payers to cover that. I think it's a big issue for the people who live there. I think it's a big issue for the fact that the stadium is going to be there, for the players who potentially could be there. That is something I would love to devote time and resources to.
I think I agree with Tom that the next big story will be like the NFL team and what happens with the RFK campus. And maybe sort of relatedly how the downtown that's not really related, downtown revitalization. I think those are the two next big stories. The most undercovered story, I would say, or at least something that I wish I knew more about, could read more about. There's been some good reporting on this topic in the Post and the Informer, but just about kids in the district, how the pandemic has affected them, how they're recovering from it. I think I'm thinking specifically about the outrageously high truancy rates and the crime between and among sometimes very young 12, 13, 11-year-old kids who are committing some very serious crimes. That's sort of the smoke, and I want to know what's underneath some of that. If I had another 3 or 4 of me, or at least a couple of writers, I think I would sort of like Michael, I would focus more. The council does these like incredibly long, monotonous, often boring oversight hearings where they grill agency heads relentlessly, and sometimes not relentlessly actually. But I wish there was more robust coverage of this. And City Paper has done this a couple years ago when our staff was much bigger and we were still printing a paper. And so if I would do that every year if I had the people to assign to it. It's a really great window into what the government is up to, how the executive agencies are functioning, and how the council is performing its oversight duties. Another one that I would do if I could have 2, I think I'm really interested in like the internal, I guess, like operations and politics in the police department. I think that has I think that contributes to how the officers operate on the street and, in effect, how the city handles crime. And there's just not a lot of that reporting going on. I wish there were more.
I forgot to say that even though this is the city, we really ought to pay attention to what happens in the Larry Hogan, Angela Alsobrooks race. Yeah. Because if Larry Hogan, whatever he says, he's where he is in the middle, it could substantially change how the District of Columbia is treated on Capitol Hill if the Republicans get control of the Senate.
And if I can, Jim, I just want to go back to a past question you had about the future of the media after listening to folks here on this panel talking about I wish I had. I think you'll see greater collaboration. Yeah. We really need to work together because we all are striving to get these same stories out, and there's no need for us to do it separately.
I hate to do this. I really hate to do this, but we have to end the program. And I want to thank our journalists for all coming this year, thank our bar presidents for all being here, and thank all of you for coming and spending your afternoon with us. We'll be back next year for our annual, what are we? We're up to 17. So next year we'll be back for our 17th annual Meet the Press. So thank you very much and take care.